There has been a lot of debate recently as to whether or not it's a good idea to learn Japanese by watching anime. And while I don't think that you should learn 100% of your Japanese from anime, I do think that anime can be a good part of a balanced Japanese study regimen. So here are 10 tips for learning Japanese through anime, as well as 4 bonus tips on what to avoid. So my first tip is that before you even start, before you consider learning Japanese through anime, take a Japanese class. You do need a foundation, you do need some basics and some fundamentals, otherwise you're just going to be totally lost. And it just so happens that on this very channel, I have a series of lessons for beginners. 45-part series, Japanese for beginners. Check out the link in the video description and in the card floating next to my face. My second tip is that you find something that you have already seen in your native language dubbed into Japanese. So in my case, the very first thing that I rented when I went to Japan as an exchange student was The Little Mermaid dubbed in Japanese. And my host family was really confused at the time. Why is she doing this? They even said, hey, there's the English version like right there. And I said, yeah, like I own the English language version and I have it memorized. That's why I want to get it in Japanese. So the reasoning behind this is you already know everything that everyone is saying basically. You already know how the story goes. So it doesn't really matter that you don't understand anything in the Japanese, but in a way you do understand the Japanese because you knew it in your native language and now you're hearing it in Japanese. So that's a good hack. I mean, this can also work with anime that you originally saw dubbed into English or your native language. In my case, I saw Sailor Moon dubbed into English originally, so when I watched it in Japanese, even though I didn't know Japanese, I still knew what was going on because I had seen it originally in English. So my third tip for learning Japanese through anime is pick an anime that you actually like. I'm going to give you some suggestions in this video of actual anime series that you can look into, or categories of anime series rather, that you can look into to learn Japanese. But if it's something that you just don't like, it's just not your thing, don't bother, because the whole point of this is to have fun while learning Japanese. And if you're not having fun while learning Japanese, you might as well just learn it from a textbook. You're much more likely to stick with it if you pick a series that you're really super into. My fourth tip is here's a category of anime that is great for learners. Kids series. Now in the otaku community there's a little confusion. Well, what is for kids? Isn't all anime for adults? No, wait, isn't all anime for kids? I've been hearing that recently. There's some blurred lines there, but generally speaking, if you go on my anime list, they have like whole categories with lists of anime, and if you go to kids anime, they have a whole list of series for you. A lot of Pokemon to sift through, but once you get through the Pokemon, it's more than just Pokemon. There's many series for kids that you can look through, and kids series are just going to be generally easier to understand. They're going to have simpler plots, they're going to use simpler vocabulary, and therefore they're going to be better tools for you to learn Japanese. Besides Pokemon, there is Digimon, Doraemon, anything that ends in a mon probably is for kids. And then I recently got turned on to this series, Bananya, from my anime list in the kids section. It's this really cute, like these little kittens that are bananas also, and it's just really cute, short little episodes for kids. So for my fifth tip, I have another genre of anime that you should look into if you're interested in learning Japanese, and that is shoujo and or romance anime series. What is shoujo, you may ask? I mean, the short answer is it is anime intended for girls, but yeah, it's a specific style, and shoujo anime tends to have simpler plots. It tends to be more relationship based, so it tends to be a little more easy to follow, and it also tends to be a little more emotional, so it also has that connection that makes it a little bit easier to follow. Shoujo anime is more likely to feature more realistic characters that speak like real Japanese people as well, which is also a plus. Some of my favorite shoujo series, if you look behind me, you'll see a lot of the manga versions of these, but I love Glass Mask, or Garasu no Kamen. It's a series about a girl named Maya who's learning how to be an actress. Of course I love Sailor Moon. I don't know how you could have possibly guessed. That does kind of count. It is shoujo anime. It is leaning towards magical girl anime, which is a subgenre, but it's still generally relationship based, a little more emotional, and much easier to follow than a lot of other anime. I also like other rom-coms like Lovely Complex, or Fruits Basket, or Marmalade Boy, any of those like classics. No monsters, no kaiju, no isekai, just like normal people living their normal lives, and usually about friendships and romances. And that leads into my sixth tip is to look up series that are more in the slice of life category. Not necessarily shoujo, but more slice of life. And a lot of these do tend to be shoujo. They tend to overlap a little bit, but there are some like shonen and like non-shoujo shonen series that are also slice of life. So series like Yorimoi is a great example, even though they do something pretty extraordinary. It's about 4 teenage girls who go to Antarctica, but it's still, you know, kind of more about their friendships with each other and their relationships. 2 overlooked gems that are extremely popular in Japan, but not so much in the otaku community, are Sazae-san and Chibi Maruko-chan. Those are excellent anime series to learn Japanese by because they feature like normal, average Japanese families. And so it's just so many normal situations that will teach you Japanese that you can actually use in your everyday life. Not to mention, they are really good series. Another anime that I like that kind of falls into this category is Lovely Muko. It's about a dog. It's basically a slice of life, life through the eyes of a dog who loves her master, and it's adorable. The next 2 tips have to do with Netflix. So tip number 7 is to find anime series on Netflix that have Japanese captions available. You might have to play with VPNs a little bit, but generally speaking, if it is a very popular anime, if it is an anime that has an English dub, and a Japanese dub and dubs in other languages besides Japanese, and if it is like a Netflix produced anime series like Aggretsuko or Seven Deadly Sins, it's a lot more likely to have Japanese captions that you can turn on and off. Eva has this, Evangelion has Japanese captions. Castlevania actually has a Japanese dub track and Japanese captions. So I saw it in English, I really liked it in English, but you could also watch it in Japanese with Japanese subtitles. And the advantage of watching Japanese anime in Japanese with the Japanese subtitles is just get that double input. And if you miss something, like if they're speaking too quickly or there's a word you didn't catch, you can always pause it and then look at the Japanese on the screen. And then if you still didn't get it, you can click and change the subtitles to English or whatever your language is and get it that way. So my 8th tip also has to do with Netflix, and this is just something neat that I discovered very recently, and that's that some anime, typically the ones that I was talking about earlier on Netflix, the ones that are popular, the ones that are dubbed in multiple languages, they sometimes have a descriptive track for the visually impaired in Japanese. So this is really cool because like if you're watching an anime series and the descriptive track will basically just narrate everything that is happening on the screen. So if you're not visually impaired, if you can see what's happening on the screen, then, you know, it's a blue sky. The narrator will say, a blue sky. And then like a burst of light happens on the screen and the narrator will say, a burst of light appears in the sky. And they'll say it in Japanese, but you'll know exactly what they're saying because you'll be seeing what is happening as they are saying it. So that's another neat way to learn Japanese through anime.
深夜、屋敷の窓を開ける金髪の少女。下を覗き込み、身を乗り出す。
My 9th tip for learning Japanese through anime is me. I have a few videos on this channel where I break down episodes of anime one word at a time to teach the Japanese language and to show the translation process. I have a lot for Sailor Moon, but I also have isolated videos here and there for Avatar: The Last Airbender, Carol and Tuesday, Aggretsuko, JoJo's. Personally, just think manga's better than anime. But the other reason why is that you can go at your own pace. If you run across a word you don't know, you really have the time to stop and like look things. That was weird. I'll keep it. Who cares? And I think a lot of the naysayers, the people who say, oh, you should never learn Japanese through anime, I think these are the things that they're thinking about when they say, oh, this is why you shouldn't learn Japanese through anime. And I think a lot of why I lean more towards, oh, you should learn Japanese through anime is because the kind of anime that I tend to like are shoujo, slice of life, the kind of kids anime, the kind of anime series that are good for learning Japanese, but not all anime is really good for learning Japanese. So the first the first category of anime that is just not good to watch if you want to learn Japanese is anything really produced before the year 2000. And unfortunately, this cuts out a lot of really good series, including Sailor Moon Classic, but my reason behind this is audio quality just wasn't as good back then. Like, unless you can get a really good, like, remastered release of this anime, a lot of the audio quality is just not going to be as good, so you can't hear the consonants as clearly, and that can be be really frustrating if you're trying to learn Japanese. Another bad thing about older anime is they'll use a lot of outdated slang, so you might learn what you think is cool slang, but it's actually really outdated slang, or shigo. So yeah, that's a little pitfall. Another category of anime that you should avoid if you're trying to learn Japanese is anything that's sci-fi, fantasy, or a period piece. And the reason behind that is they use a lot of vocabulary that you're just not going to use in your daily life. You don't need to know what time flux capacitor is in Japanese. You're not going to need to know what like oxygen airlock is in Japanese. So you're going to be learning a lot of obscure and frankly useless vocabulary words. I mean, maybe when you're super advanced later you'll want to learn those words, but when you're a beginner, I think that's just too much complicated information too soon. And as far as fantasy and period pieces go, especially fantasy, they use a lot of made-up words. They just make up words for the anime that don't exist in real life, so you're learning completely useless words. And the characters in these series tend to be very larger than life, and they tend to speak very strangely, not like real people speak. So if you emulate them, people are gonna think you're fucking weird. Another category of anime that you should avoid is anything that is very niche, very otaku, and generally they use vocabulary that doesn't actually exist. Like, they do use vocabulary that exists, generally speaking. It's just they speak very quickly, and they all tend to have very, very strange speech patterns. They use weird particles, they word things strangely, and yeah, it's another one of those instances where if you emulate those characters, people are gonna think you're really weird. And the fourth pitfall of learning Japanese through anime, and something that you should avoid, well, not really avoid, just keep this in mind, is that when you're learning Japanese through anime, you're gonna be reading the subtitles generally kind of in and out while you're learning the Japanese, and try to avoid taking those translations literally. As I try to preach on this channel in general, there is no exact, like, universal translation for everything. There is no one perfect way to translate every single vocabulary word, every single phrase, every single grammar thing that comes up. So the translations are going to vary. You're going to hear one word translated one way, and you're going to think, oh, okay, this is what this word means, but then you might see it later in a different episode of a different anime subtitled a different way. Don't do that knee-jerk reaction of, oh, someone was wrong. They're probably both correct, and there's just different nuances to the words that don't necessarily exist in English. So just keep that in mind when you are reading the subtitles and learning Japanese through anime. So that was my 10 cents on the issue. Again, I do think that anime is a valid way of learning Japanese. You just need to make sure that you're watching the right kinds of anime and being aware that, yeah, anime is not real life, anime characters are not real people. So in addition to anime, you should definitely consult, you know, more traditional forms of learning like textbooks and classes. And my Japanese for Beginners series. Bye!